All right, everybody, welcome, welcome. Come on in. Decided I'm going to record this one because I know some people are not going to be here. And it seems like we might be having some trouble with Zoom this morning anyway. So let's do this. This is the first week of what I refer to as Mr. Jackson's Miraculous Poetry Workshop. It's not really all that miraculous, but I wanted to share it with you guys. So here it is. A little background of why we're doing poetry for the next 3 weeks. First of all, you guys are going to be transitioning to either coming back or not coming back. You only have 3 weeks of doing that, and then it's spring break. And I want to start after spring break doing our normal stuff. So I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time to for people who didn't finish the final to get their final turned in, for me to turn in grades, all of that jazz. But the real reason is that I love poetry. I absolutely love poetry. I grew up writing poetry. I went to a special art school for creative writing so that I could write more poetry. I have won awards for writing poetry. I've won songwriting awards. I've published books in poetry under the name A.P. Jackson. And so I absolutely love this stuff. It's what I'm passionate about. I wanted to share with you guys something that I was passionate about, and also to hopefully give you a different perspective on how you might have seen poetry up till now. All right. So if you come into this and you're like, poetry is lame, poetry is for losers, I don't know, whatever presuppositions, that means something you thought before that you brought to the table, whatever thoughts you had before, let's put those aside and try and rethink about this, right? So here's this miraculous poetry workshop where hopefully we can dismantle some of the things that you thought about poetry that aren't true. First, let's talk about what is poetry. The attendance assignment was asking you that exact same question. What is poetry? How do you define what poetry is? If you talk to like a weird hippie guy like myself in a coffee shop before COVID, then they might tell you something like, everything's poetry, man. Like it's in the air, it's in the soil, everything. It's the rhythm of life, which is kind of true. I feel like that's actually something Keanu Reeves might say, right? Like poetry runs throughout everything. But then that doesn't really help us understand how you're supposed to write a poem. And that's why you end up getting English teachers like myself who say something like, let's learn about rhyming couplets. And then we try to talk about poetry in that lens. We talk about poetry through the lens of Shakespeare, and we say, oh, Shakespeare, such a good poet. But then, how does Shakespeare being a good poet give us an amazing spoken word poet sharing a poem during Biden's inauguration, right? How are those two things connected? Because William Shakespeare doesn't seem like somebody who would really care or be involved with Biden's inauguration. So why is this thing here that we do? And how are those two things at all similar? Well, let's talk about it. First, we have to dismiss some of these myths about poetry. There's some things that you probably think about poetry where you're like, every time I say it, that's what pops into your head. Let's throw that away. You also might end up, I don't know about you guys, but this used to be a joke when I was a kid of like the teacher who comes into class dressing all cool and sits backwards in their chair and they're just like, did you know? Did you know that William Shakespeare is a hip hop artist? Yeah, he's the first real rhymer. And that's not what we're doing. We're not trying to make poetry cooler than it is. We're not trying to make it lamer than it is. We're not trying to make it boring. We're trying to help you understand exactly what it is and why people engage with it. So the first thing is it rhymes. This is a myth, meaning it's not something that is true. Poetry doesn't rhyme, at least not in the way that we think of rhyme. It can rhyme, and many poems do rhyme, but poetry goes back well before this whole concept. In fact, like 2,000 years, no, not even 7,000 years ago, when people were sharing stuff with their voices, they weren't even necessarily writing stuff down because that would have been incredibly expensive. The idea of rhyme wasn't like cat in the hat. It wasn't like, oh, these words sound the same, so we're going to smush them together. It was this concept of rhyming ideas. You could put ideas together in ways that were symmetrical, which is a geometry term, right? This idea of this looks the same on one side and the same on the other side. And by putting two ideas next to each other, we could show how they connect, and it ends up creating a third idea, right? This ends up looking like the Triforce in Zelda or something like that. Ideas coming together to make something new. This is a term called synergy that usually people in businesses use. Like we want to get together with like this famous YouTuber like PewDiePie, and we're going to make him sell sneakers. And when we do, we get more money. Synergy. That's not what we're talking about. All right. What we are talking about is when we put two ideas together next to each other and they help illuminate something else. That was the original idea behind rhyme. And we can see this from 7,000-year-old poetry that when we translate it, it doesn't rhyme in the original text. It doesn't have to rhyme in the new translation. It just rhymes in concept, this thought, these two ideas coming together or more ideas coming together. So when we talk about rhyme, we're definitely not talking about cat, hat, fat, sat, bat. We're not even talking about the fastest rhymers, the MCs, the hip hop, anything like that. the hip hop, says the dweeby white dude. All right. So the second myth is the idea that it's deep. Oh, I also wanted to touch on when we talk about it rhymes, rhyme isn't just things at the end of words like cat, hat, bat, fat, sat. It is alliteration, which is at the beginning of word. It's slant rhymes, which can be just the sounds that words make and sometimes in the middle of words. And we're going to talk about rhyme in the second week. So just think about that. Second thing is it's deep. Poetry is not deep. In fact, if you want to look up really not deep poetry, just Google the word limerick. Limerick, limerick. A limerick is not deep. In fact, they're just really bad, dirty jokes. That's basically what it is. You might have heard a limerick in terms of there once was a man from Nantucket who had I can't continue, it's inappropriate. But it's like the that type of poem is like dedicated to just telling dirty jokes. Poetry is not especially deep. It's not, wow, I have to be really thoughtful and go to a cafe and like chill so I can understand the deeper roots. No, that's not what we're talking about. Poetry runs throughout all sorts of different things and is in comedy. Many stand-up comics utilize aspects of poetry to make their comedy funnier. Rhythm, rhyme, alliteration, punchlines, all of that was present within poetry. And then we just started using it in other places. So the third thing, it's difficult. It's difficult to write. I don't want to write a poem because it's hard. I sit down to write the poem and I'm just like, how do I write the poem? Maybe you're thinking, I don't want to rhyme because when I sit down to rhyme, it's hard and I don't like rhyming. But we just dismiss that myth. It doesn't have to rhyme. So since it doesn't have to rhyme, let's figure out what it does have to do. And maybe when we realize what we do have to do, we're like, that's actually easier. I would say I can sit on the toilet with my phone and I can finish a poem from beginning to end in that time. I can't do that with a short story, and I certainly can't do that with an essay. So of all the things that you're going to be assigned in an English class, if we understand what poetry is, it can be the easiest thing to write. All right. Lastly, it's uncool. Look, I don't know what cool is. I'm a guy with a side part. I don't care, right? Like that, the idea of cool does not matter to me. So maybe poetry is uncool, sure, but it certainly wasn't. It wasn't always uncool. And for many people, it's not uncool. And so I don't want that to be something that we bring to the table where we're like, I just don't like it. It's not very cool. Mostly because it's everywhere, right? Like I said, with comedy, Dave Chappelle uses poetry, uses aspects of poetic structures in his stand-up comedy. Dave Chappelle is uncool, okay? Maybe you look at anybody who's doing rap or hip hop or music at all, right? The 1975's lyrics are poetry. Super Duper Kyle, I think he just goes by Kyle now, but hip hop artists I like, that's poetry, right? All that music is poetry. And so it's really difficult for you to be like, hey, this whole thing is uncool. I don't want to do it because I look like a loser when I'm trying to do poetry. When you're like, dude, there's so many different things that you could be doing with it that for you to just label all of it uncool is the same as people who are like, oh, anime's not cool or video games aren't cool or anything like that. You're like, there's so much of it though. Like there's just so many different ways. Not all of it's the same. Not all of it is stuff that you won't like. And my goal in life in general is to like as much stuff as possible. Look, like the world is big. It's got a bunch of stuff going on. And if you go around trying to find all the things you don't like, you will have a lot of stuff. You'll be like, wow, I really don't like this and I don't like that and I don't like pickles, I don't like mustard, I don't like windy days. Sure. But your life is going to suck. I don't know what to tell you. If you live your life constantly trying to find the things you don't like, you seldom find the things you do like. So give it a chance. Maybe poetry will be cool. You just got to find the right kind, right? So I put that as a myth. Let's move on to the nitty gritty. The 4 steps to better poetry are the 3 weeks. I know we're gonna shove a step in to one of those other weeks, but purpose is what we're talking about today. Rhyme is what we'll talk about next week. Awareness, like being aware of life in general, and also killing your ego, which if you don't know what that means, fine, you don't have to because we're talking about it in week 3. So we'll get there, but that basically just is the concept of like getting over yourself, not trying to be cool, not trying to think this stuff through too much. All right. So moving forward, here's a very important quote. Poetry is nearer to vital truth than history. So this is Plato. He's the guy who like basically invented philosophy, one of the earliest philosophers, the guy who started thinking about stuff, which is a whole thing we could talk about that I think is really cool. But this whole idea of poetry is nearer to vital truth than history is. Think about it this way. There are 2 people. They go on a date, right? First date. One person loves it. They're obsessed with this person. They're like, oh my God, we connect on every level. I just feel like my whole body's on fire when I'm around them. I just want to smush this person. And the other person is like, so I met this creeper on a dating app or Instagram or whatever the kids are using these days, and I hated it. And then you ask both of those people to write a history of what happened. Just give me the facts. Just give me exactly what occurred, right? How are you supposed to capture both of those experiences with just the facts of what happened? I showed up to school. I went on my phone. I saw this person. I slid into their DMs. I said this thing. Then they said this thing. There's nothing behind it. There's no vital truth behind it. The feeling that one gets when they receive those messages, the feeling they got when they sent those messages, you're not having any of the context that helps us understand how the other people are feeling. And so you're missing out on so much of what occurred. And that's what Plato is talking about. If we are able to capture this thing, which we're going to talk about in a second, then we're better at writing. Is there still nobody here or people just waiting? I should probably like be intentionally checking that, right? There we go. All right, I'm intentionally checking it. So let's talk about purpose. Why write poetry? What is poetry about? Why are we sitting down to write it in the first place? When I think about writing an essay is something that I sit down to write because my teacher told me to, or because I'm trying to get information across. When I sit down to write a story, I want to talk about something that happened. I think it was really interesting. There's reasons to write those things. So why write poetry? Boop. Here's the thing. I want you to imagine a topic, just something that you know poetry is about. You're just going to like, okay, I'm going to write about this thing. Give you a hint. My first poem that I ever wrote as a kid was in elementary school when I was forced to write one. And I wrote about the video game Duke Nukem. Duke Nukem had come out, and my parents didn't know that I played it behind their backs. It was very violent, and I wrote a poem about it. I got called up to the office and I got in trouble. I want you to imagine what poetry is supposed to be about, because I think when I say that, you don't think about Duke Nukem, right? Like, that's not the usual. You're not like, oh yeah, Call of Duty. That's some good meat. That's some good meat for some poetry. So I want you to think about this. People usually write about what we call abstract nouns. Abstract nouns are things that you can't hold in your hand. So the human soul is an abstract noun, but also feelings, all feelings and emotions, right? Happiness, sadness, they're things, they're persons, places, or things. So that's a noun, but they're not things, right? A mask is a thing, but love, not so thingy, that thing, right? So when we talk about this, we usually write about abstract nouns like love, fate, life, and death, right? These concepts, these like, what does it mean to be alive? Let's write poetry about it. So imagine a topic like that you write poetry about. Poetry is about huge ideas, really, really big thoughts, things that you think about when you're thinking about everything all at once. When you're laying in bed and you're super anxious about the next day, when you're worried about how life is going to be, you think of big ideas. Why are we alive? What does it mean to really be loved? What if I've never been loved? Those are like poetry concepts, right? They are huge, which means they're basically impossible to pin down. Let's take this idea of love, right? We take this idea of love and we say, you love your family, the grown-ups in your house, the people that you grew up with, the people that are around you that have been around your entire life. You're like, yeah, I have to. I have to love my family. You don't have to love your family. If people are hurting you, you don't have to love them. Just keep that in mind. Secondly, friends. You love your friends, the people you choose to hang out with, the people that are around you that you like really connect with, that you're like, these are my people, my chosen tribe, right? You also love your partner. If you have a romantic partner, right? This can be people you want to kiss, that you want to smush against in ways that we're not going to talk about in this class. Or if you are somebody who doesn't have that sort of feeling, but you have like a deep connection with another person, right? And it's not like a friend, you're like, ooh, they like make me feel that thing. Then I think it's love, whatever that means, right? Those are like love concepts. In fact, Plato, way back in the time of ancient Greece, would have talked about all of those different concepts of love, which all had different words. There was like brotherly love, there was familial love, there was romantic love, and all of those have different words that we use, but we call them all one thing because we know that they share something in common, even though it looks like they don't share anything in common. Of course I love my family. Of course I love my friends. But do you love your pets? Do you love your pets the same way that you love your romantic partners? That's not okay. We're not going to talk about that either, but that's not the same thing. So what is it that is the same thing? How are those two things connected? I love tacos. Who doesn't love tacos? But you don't love tacos like you love your family. Like I love my family, but tacos, right? I'm sorry, that was bad. And then your experiences, your memories. Maybe you love feeling sad. Some people are like that. I grew up listening to lots of emo music, so I can definitely say I love feeling sad, right? Maybe you love going on roller coasters. Maybe you love Christmas morning. Maybe whatever it is that you love, those things aren't the same sort of love as love for your pets, and they certainly aren't the same sort of thing as love for tacos, because not all tacos are created equal, all right? So love is this really abstract thing, but it's also a really concrete thing. So you have this idea, this really big feeling, but then you also have this like every day, do you experience love? How do you experience love? People will talk about things like love languages, which is like, I really like it when people give me gifts, or I really like it when they say nice things to me, or I really like it when they touch my hand and it makes me go, woo, right? All of those are experiences of love, but they aren't the thing. But we can talk about them, and maybe when I talk about them, you kind of get that feeling of that thing. If I share with you a sentimental story of when I first met my partner and we fell in love, and I don't talk about love, but I talk about how that was, just that moment. It's like a romantic comedy, right? You start feeling that thing. So, how do we actually, we have this purpose. This purpose is to write about big concepts. But how do I write poetry with purpose? How do I actually write something that deals with a big concept? So, we're going to describe things. And by things, I mean things that you have trouble describing. Like, oh, yeah, I feel something. And you don't know if it's love or if it's anger or if it's anxiety or if it's any number of other things. So you're just freaking out and you're like, I don't know. I feel things, right? What I want you to do is take that idea. I'm going to write about love. And then I want you to take the idea of love and throw it into a cage. All right. In this case, look at this little picture. This picture of love right at the center. I'm going to write about love. Don't. But in the process, do. All right. So here's the trick. What we're going to do is just like when you have an art assignment and you take your Chromebook and you start tracing it, you like just pick up a picture and then trace the picture on the Chromebook. What we're going to do is that, but with this feeling. We have a feeling, but we're not going to mention it. I don't want you to write a poem about love. I want you to write a poem that feels like love. I don't want you to write a poem about sadness. I don't want you to write a poem about heartbreak. I don't want you to write a poem about any of these abstract nouns, these big concepts. I want you to write a poem that makes me feel that thing. So tell me about the experiences. All of this is the experience of love. Describing that stuff on the outside of it helps you understand where words fail, where you can't write anymore. So this is hard to describe. I usually have a whiteboard and I'm like, look, it's here. You're feeling this stuff. So just go along with the slides and hopefully this will make sense. Boop, boop. So let's take out that concept of love. We still have a circle or the shape. I can't make actual shapes in PowerPoints properly. So we have the outline of where the thing used to be, but we're not saying what the thing is, right? Imagine it like this. There's a road that goes all the way around to the border of California. And you drive all the way around the border of California. Do you know what California looks like? You've never been to California, but you've been all around the outside of it. You know exactly the shape of California. And if you ask somebody to look at the map of where you drove and say, hey, where did I drive? They'd probably be like, oh, you drove California. That's the shape of California. I know it. That's what you want to do with poetry. You want to talk about all of the other stuff that makes up the shape of the thing. You want to talk about a feeling, but you're instead going to talk about the stuff that happened that made that feeling. All right? We're going to talk about opening a gift on Christmas morning. We're going to talk about when their hand touched your hand and you were like, ooh, right? But we're not going to say, I fell in love and then they left and then my heart was broken. That's bad poetry, right? I fell in love and then they left. I think I'm going deaf. I can't hear you say I love you anymore, right? That's bad poetry. There you go. I made it for you. We're not going to do that. It doesn't quite work. It just rhymes and talks about stuff, but it doesn't actually feel that thing. All right. So here's a phrase that's going to make no sense until it makes all the sense in the world, which is things aren't things. Only things are things. Love, which is a thing, isn't a thing like a mask. Abstract nouns aren't nouns unless they are nouns. So an abstract noun like love doesn't really feel like anything. It's just floating around up there and you're like, yeah, we all feel this for tacos and for pets and for people we want to kiss. What? Those aren't the same thing. Don't kiss your pets. Don't kiss tacos. You want to talk about experiences that you had that all had this same really hard to define feeling. So You have loving your pets, loving your family, loving your friends, loving tacos, loving feeling sad. All of those were examples I gave. When we call all of this love, we fail to actually talk about the things we are feeling and experiencing. So we don't actually describe the thing. We instead just put a cork in it. We put something in there instead. Here's an example that makes sense in my head. You get upset, you punch a hole in the wall. Don't do that. That's bad. But then in order to patch the wall, what you have to do is get stuff, usually like crumpled up wallpaper, crumpled up newspaper or something, and you put it in there to fill in the hole, and then you put stuff over it, right? Spackle or whatever, and then paint it. So it looks like nothing was there, right? It looks like you didn't punch a hole in the wall. You just filled in the gap. That's what we do when we say something like love. We are filling in the gap. But the gap is the thing. The place where our words fail and we can't talk about it anymore is love. Love, when I say that word, isn't love. I'm still here. But the feeling of it is there where we stop being able to describe it. Because I don't love tacos, but my goodness, I love tacos, especially birria tacos from outside the masa. That's all I'm thinking about. I keep on seeing them on Instagram. I can't do this. All right. So things aren't things, only things are things. That is where I'm going to leave you with purpose. Why are we writing? We're writing to capture the thing that words can't capture. And we're doing it with words. How do we do that? By writing about everything else that surrounds this feeling, so that people can understand the shape of it, even though they'll never understand the thing itself. You can fall into the hole that is love. You can fall deeply into that place, and you'll never know really what it is. But if you describe the shape on the outside of it, you start to put those pieces together and you start hearing other people's experiences. We're creating a map that helps us get back to that place. With that, you guys are all lovely and amazing. This has been the first week of our poetry workshop talking about purpose. I am so glad that you guys were here to talk with me. And by that, I mean nobody is here. I love you guys. First period. You're awesome. I will see you guys on Wednesday. Be here or be square. Dope. And goodbye.